There's no typical day when it comes to being a paramedic. As Joanna Sokol writes in her new book, A Real Emergency, Stories from the Ambulance, each shift runs a fine line of organized chaos that occasionally dips into absolute mayhem. And whether she's actively rushing to a case or finally getting a moment to breathe, that front cabin of the ambulance is Sokol's command center.
We go to work in the morning, we sign on and pick up our ambulance, and then we're sent out to various parts of the city. And in some slower rural areas, they actually have stations where they get to hang out. But in most busy urban areas, you're literally physically in the ambulance for 12, 15 hours, just driving around the city. And in between calls, you're either parking on street corners or you're driving to other parts of the city.
Sokol says there's almost never time for a break. They have to jump at every rare opportunity to eat, rest, and use the bathroom.
And then at the end of our day, when we're really, really tired and dehydrated and we're ready to go home, usually at that point, they'll tell us, I'm so sorry, we're low on ambulances. We're going to need you to hold over. And then we go run like 3 more calls. And then eventually we make it back to station and we change out our equipment and finish up our charts and we go home and come back and do it again the next day.
Despite what's shown on television, the high demand isn't often created by life or death emergencies. Instead, Sokol says a majority of her time was spent helping people with minor medical problems.
We're out there dealing with the elderly. We're working with homeless people, with people who have mental health, chronic medical issues. They're calling us for the 3rd time today because they just fell and they're stuck behind the bathtub again, or they're unhoused and they're hungry and they're just trying to get sandwiches from the ER. And so they're calling us for blankets and sandwiches. We really run a lot of medium level, very slow, sort of busy primary care, healthcare, social work kind of stuff.
Sokol says they'll get a true emergency every now and then, but those are far and few between the typical calls. However, this reality doesn't line up with the training paramedics go through and can leave some medics with a bad taste in their mouths.
And so there's this really big tension in ambulance work today because you get a lot of people who sort of feel like they're supposed to be just running on critical emergencies. And to be fair, those are the calls that we have equipment for and we have training and we actually know how to do. But instead, we spend most of our day dealing with folks who don't have insurance and their prescription ran out, or they're drinking too much and they need help with the alcohol, or they're using fentanyl and they're stuck out on the street, or they don't have access to food or clean water. You know, those are the calls we're actually running. And unfortunately, we don't have the equipment or the tools to deal with those calls in a way that's effective. So it becomes really challenging as a provider because you kind of spend the day carrying around your cardiac monitor to solve heart attacks with, and then you go on all these calls for people who really need like a lawyer and a social worker.
Being armed with the wrong tools sets these medics up for failure. Every day they do their absolute best to help the community, and most days their best isn't good enough. They're constantly falling short in a career where failing has direct impact on another human's life.
People often ask us what the hardest part of the job is. And I think they're always expecting me to talk about death and dying and trauma and pediatrics. And to be fair, those calls are very hard. When young people die, it's really brutal. It's awful. But for me personally, the hardest part of the job by far wasn't actually these individual traumas and deaths. The hardest part was going into these situations, doing the absolute best that you can, and knowing it's not good enough, just over and over again. Having to sit with your patients who have some horrific quality of life, some awful ongoing chronic medical problem. We know what kind of care they need. They're not able to get it because it's too expensive or it's too far away or it doesn't exist yet. And just having to sit with them.
Sokol says that an unexpected part of her job is to simply be a witness for people, to sit beside someone during one of the hardest moments of their life and be able to offer nothing more than acknowledgement and human connection.
And for me, carrying that around was much, much harder than carrying around the like individual traumas and deaths and really sad things that we saw. It was those calls where you're just not able to help. And you're like, well, this is going to continue to suck, but you know, here's a blanket.
After living through years of this daily struggle, Sokol wondered how the field had turned into this, a sort of purgatory of semi-private, semi-public health services that had too many responsibilities to truly be effective in one area.
We all kind of have this sense that EMS is not what it's supposed to be today, you know, that we're running all of these calls, we're not getting paid enough, We're super overwhelmed. When did that start? And I started to look back and I interviewed people who were older and more experienced than me. And I read all the history I could find. And I kept thinking I was going to find the start date. You know what I mean? Oh, it all started when there were cell phones, or it all started due to economics. And the farther back into history I reached, the more I saw that ambulances have always been overwhelmed. They've always been underpaid.
She came across a story from the early 1900s where the New York ambulance program was in a fight with local police. The medics complained that the cops were taking advantage of them and making them go pick up drunk people off the side of the road.
And the hospital who owned the ambulance was saying, hey, you got to stop calling us for this. We have to save our ambulances for real emergencies. And this was back in the horse and buggy days. I mean, this was before motors. They were like, our horses need to rest. And the cops were like, no, we need your help dealing with these drunks. And that was 130 years ago. You know what I mean? And I read that and I burst out laughing. I ran to work and I read it aloud to all my friends, and everybody totally lost their minds about it. And it's just like, we've been dealing with this stuff since ambulances got invented.
Which may not be a comforting message, but Sokol did find some validation and camaraderie in the fact that she was going through many of the same struggles her predecessors had. Unfortunately, this shared experience isn't enough to make up for the overwhelming challenges paramedics face, like the current workforce shortage.
In general, we get paid really poorly. We get treated really badly. So the amount of people that want to do the job is less and less every year. The job is really confusing and hard. It is very rewarding too. I really, really loved it, but it's really hard to do past your 30s because it's so physically demanding.
Not to mention the mental toll of sleep deprivation, compassion fatigue, and PTSD. Sokol included the perspectives of various paramedics and EMTs in her book, many of which talk about mental health. And though there's been a good effort to address these concerns, Sokol thinks that there may be other, more pressing issues to look at first.
I'm really happy that it's starting to happen, but no amount of therapy is going to make up for the fact that I've been awake for 48 hours. You know, we're working these really long hours. In San Francisco, where I spent the bulk of my career, we actually made pretty good money, but the median wage for paramedics in the US is $25 an hour. So they're working crazy amounts of overtime just to try to survive. We're getting held over. We're working nights. We don't have rest breaks. We don't have bathrooms. We don't have stations. You're just getting your butt kicked all day long. You sleep when you can. But often, if you're working a 90-hour week, you get 5-6 hours a night. You're doing the best you can just to stay afloat. And then it's like you're reading some PowerPoint presentation about mental health that's like, make sure you talk to a therapist about your trauma and don't drink too much caffeine. And it's so incongruous with the real physical logistical demands of the job.
So while it's great that there are efforts being made, they're meaningless if the systemic problems continue to run rampant. In general, Sokol says it really all boils down to expanding worker rights and protections.
It's not about the money, but if you do pay us more, then we could afford to pick up less overtime and sleep more. We could get more workers. There could be a little bit more competition, but shifts that end when they're supposed to, hospitals not holding ambulances stuck on the wall waiting for a bed for 5 hours so we can't get out and run calls. I would like to see, theoretically someday, I'd love to see some legislation passed that would let ambulances turn around at the hospitals faster so we don't get stuck on the wall for a few hours. That would let medics go home at the end of their shift instead of getting held over for hours with no warning. That would require, the occasional break for us for rest and bathroom, or help us get back to where we have stations so that we actually can get out and take a break during the day instead of being stuck in the front cab of an ambulance for 12 to 16 hours or 24 sometimes, And so for me, that's what it would look like. It would just look like good old-fashioned labor protections.
Some steps are being taken to move towards this goal. For instance, last year, the Federal Labor Board made a historic decision to allow paramedics to form unions independently when working for private hospitals. The hope is that separating the needs of this group from other hospital employees will emphasize the unique issues of their profession and give them direct negotiating power for better working conditions. Still, it will be a while before all of these core issues are addressed. But despite the long, hard hours of an often thankless job, Sokol found it hard to say goodbye.
It's hard and it's exhausting and it's frustrating. And yet through all of that, it's incredibly fun. You're driving around the city, you're going to all these different places, and every once in a while, you really do get to help people. And it's not necessarily the code saves. We do those. Those are cool. Yeah, we got to pulse back. But the fun calls are folks who are diabetic and they've slipped into a diabetic coma, and you give them sugar and you wake them up. And then you got to make them a sandwich so that their sugar doesn't drop again. So you're puttering around their kitchen, making them a sandwich, Or grandma called because her oxygen tank's broken. And so you're kind of grumbling about that. You fix her oxygen tank, and then you notice all her groceries are out in the kitchen because she can't put them away herself. So next thing you know, you're putting away grandma's groceries and you're BSing with your partner.
It's this camaraderie that Sokol says got her through each day. Though her grandfather may have wanted Sokol to follow his path and become a surgeon, it quickly became clear that she had found a family in emergency medicine.
I have never laughed so hard in my life as I have with a group of paramedics at 4 a.m. when you're just totally burned out and everything is silly and you're all pounding energy drinks, and half of them are chain smoking and you're in some dirty alleyway somewhere. And the stories are absolutely not appropriate to repeat on a national radio show. I don't even think I could get through the first sentence without more profanity than is allowed. But you're doubled over laughing. And when you do have those hard days, when you're completely falling apart, and you think you can't do it anymore, one of your buddies shows up with a box of donuts, and next thing you know, you're back at it.
This bond is such a foundational aspect of Sokol's time as a paramedic that it bleeds through each chapter of her book. What she thought would be a bunch of stories about patients and cases turned into a book about the medics, giving them space to feel heard and appreciated.
I'm so impressed to this day by all the people that I worked with. And I wrote this book for them. I want them to read it and feel a little bit validated. I want them to see that they're not alone. I want them to see that people are out there fighting. Maybe we can make it better. Maybe we can't, but we are in this together. And hopefully some people will hear our stories and, I don't know, vote for us to get bathroom breaks.
Sokol's book, A Real Emergency, is available now wherever books are sold. You can find more information about Joanna Sokol and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. For more behind the scenes, follow Radio Health Journal on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Elizabeth Westfield.